Envision a future where our education is not told by the conquerors, but it's told by the people. The future of education is Indigenous. That's what this platform is all about. Welcome to Native Eyes Mana'o. This is a space to share the voices of marginalized communities. I'm your host, Belinda, also known as Kalani. My Hawaiian middle name, a multi-diaspora raised in California, tracing back to my roots of Indigenous Mexican and Native Hawaiian. Here, we're going to hone in deeper on ancestral wisdom, creation stories, and real history. I moved to Hawaii in 2014, and I have been on a journey of reconnecting back to my roots. I decided to become a special education teacher, so I went back to school. I have learned through personal experience that the whole system's fucked up. While in my program, I was able to go to different classrooms and observe. I was also a skills trainer and a paraprofessional. So I was in the classroom. I also subbed, and I got to have a feel for many, many different schools. And what I saw is that the people that join fields to do better, whether that's a police officer or a doctor, a teacher, I found something common in these type of career fields. And you go into the field hoping to make a difference, and you realize that there's something much bigger above you. There are things in place of the system, and you can either follow it, obey by that, stay in a field that you know that it's wrong. We know there's so much corruption within the medical field, police field, politics, with education. There's so much corruption. Music industry, the list goes on. When you are starting out or joining this field, you want to do better. You want to educate. And that's why I became a teacher. Even before that, when I was in the field and I was working in all these different classrooms and stuff, I saw a commonality between educators, especially, and a lot of the educators, they were completely burned out, but also I saw racist educators. I saw educators that were really just hanging on by a thread because they were going through their own personal issues. Their idea of just showing up for a paycheck. That's what it became. It was showing up because, one, there's a lack of support, there's a lack of teachers, there's a lack of substitutes, and then feeling, because we're in this capitalistic society, that we always need to put our career first. So going in, even when you're hanging by a thread, these teachers would come in and they weren't really present. They were going through some really emotional, heavy things where, like, this is the time to take care of yourself, be home, and really malama that, really take care of yourself. Instead, here they are at work, doing the bare minimum, giving students with extensive support needs a computer. And that's it for the remaining of their day. They're not being taught. They're not engaging with their classmates. They're just stuck to a computer. And that's how they're learning. So one, I was seeing that, and that didn't sit well with me. Then I was also seeing that Black, Brown, Native, Indigenous cultures in these communities and demographics were being shut down or looked down upon. I had an experience in a classroom. I actually reported this teacher while in my program, and I said, nobody should be learning from her. I ended up going home that day, and I cried and cried because I started to realize that I had stepped into a career field where that's not why everyone is here. I think as someone who wanted to be a teacher and went to school for that, especially a special education teacher and hoping to make differences with students with disabilities and extensive support needs, I joined that field thinking that in my community, that's what it would also look like, but it didn't look like that. Sometimes people join a career or a field because, I don't know, but I got to see here firsthand that I was witnessing a teacher that was taking part. She was racist. Let's just call it that. There were a few different things that had happened, but there was a student who was a fair complexion, extremely aggressive, and we have a student of a darker complexion. He was the only Black student in the class. Mind you, this is a second grade classroom. This is shortly after everything happened with BLM. The student that was fair complexion would get so aggressive that he would need to be removed from the classroom and put in a room where he could hit the wall and basically destroy without destroying the classroom environment, which already is like, what? These are some of the things that they don't tell you in the education field. Like, imagine if you had a child that got removed and got put in this blank room. What intervention strategies are you doing to help de-escalate my child? During this day, the teacher had put her hands on the student, which is something that we are told and taught to never do. It doesn't matter how close you are to that student. Students with extensive support needs or students with disabilities or trauma can trigger if you touch them. And especially if they are in a state that they're dazed out or they don't want to engage. So what did this teacher do? He's dazing out during a lesson and she puts her hands on him. He flips, he freaks out, and she brings him to the principal's office. The following day, we had a psychologist observe him, but not just any kind of psychologist. A white woman comes in. She observes our second grade student in the class. He played video games, okay? He played video games, and during one of the lessons that the teacher was teaching, he was going across the room and he was like, pew, 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 around the walls. This other student would be removed, and this student, who is Black, he's dangerous. He's a threat. They called him aggressive, which is really a term that I don't like to use when it's targeted towards Black, when it's targeted towards marginalized communities, marginalized people, because we will see oftentimes that word is thrown out for bodies of culture, people of color. Then the psychologist proposed that he needed to be put on medication. She said he needed to be put on medication, and if he wasn't to be put on medication, he could no longer attend that school. He would have to go to a continuation school. Even like talking about it gets me emotional because we see that as a really common thing of continuation schools who are the students that go into this. It's marginalized communities. And so already they're told that they're not to succeed, that they're a failure, and that they're a threat to their community. Those schools, they're not good schools. They're in really poor areas. They don't have the best teachers. They don't have interventions. And also it's a group of kids who have been told this, who have just suppressed their creativity, have suppressed wanting to learn, have suppressed their identity, their culture, all of it. So what do they become? They become angry, and I don't blame them. They get older and they stay in that system because once you're in that system, it's really hard to come out of that system. It makes it harder for you. We're just perpetuating this issue. Another issue that had happened was, for those that don't know, in Hawaii, especially on Oahu, a community that is often targeted is Micronesian. This teacher was talking about her experience of working with this one boy who was Micronesian. I had already heard of this case. There was a case that happened on Oahu. I think he was 14 or 16. Anyways, he was a young boy and he was shot by the police. She had said something along the lines of like speaking negatively about Micronesian people and saying that this little boy deserved to die. There was another case that happened on Oahu, on the west side, I believe, and again, shortly after everything happened with BLM. This is all around that time. She was a little Black girl with a disability. I think she was like 9 years old. She drew an offensive picture. I don't know what the picture consisted of, but I don't care how offensive of a picture it is. The police came and they handcuffed this little girl and they arrested her. They didn't even notify or tell the mother. They put this little girl in handcuffs. How could a police officer get away with this and arrest a child and put her in handcuffs, especially a child who has a disability? She told me after class, she shared this story, which already I thought like it wasn't appropriate because like these are second graders. She had brought it up because there's consequences. That was the whole topic, consequences. The same student that we were talking about, the same boy. She brought it up because she wanted to teach him that there are consequences for your bad behaviors. No, there are racist police. I went up calling my mom and I cried. I contacted the people in my program and I tried to report this teacher. And nothing happened. The thing that did happen was no longer would students be going and learning from this teacher. I couldn't even get her fired, which is like, that's a whole other topic discussion about how you can't be fired as a teacher technically. I know some teachers don't need to be fired. I'm just gonna say that, okay? But they just like move you around. After your tenure, they move you around. There was that one teacher in Texas who called his student the ER word. He wasn't fired. What? We need to be held accountable. Like as teachers, as any job, any career, if you are a bad, racist, messed up human, lose your job. You don't deserve to stay in that field. What? That just perpetuates the issue of the system and teachers working within this system. Can't even hold them accountable. Mind baffling. It was a moment where I felt so small in the education field. There were a collection of stories like that that really pushed me deeper into realizing how can we change it? after this experience, I was kind of tired of going from classroom to classroom and observing, especially because these were volunteer hours. So within my last semester, we had a choice of either working as an emergency hire teacher or volunteering 20 hours a week. First of all, with a full-time job, being in school, who has time for extra 20 hours a week to just randomly volunteer to earn your hours? Not me, not in this day in life. So I ended up taking a position as an emergency hire at a DOE school. I knew while in my program that I always wanted to work at a Hawaiian school. That was my vision. And I knew that this was just going to be temporary. I didn't know that I was going to be that unhappy in that setting. So at this school, they played the bugle. During the bugle, I hated it. And when you hear the bugle, you are to stop. Then, as you stop, they raise the American flag, and everyone faces the flag. Some people even put their hand on their heart, not I. So during this time, I was taking my students to the bus stop. It's the end of the day. I'm taking my kids. We're walking. They play the bugle, and everyone stops. Kids, parents, teachers, even the bus drivers. Like the bus drivers got out of their bus, faced the flag, and then people put their hands on their hearts. And I was the only teacher, mind you, I was the only person who kept walking. I continued to walk. I didn't stop. And I noticed everyone's like looking at me. Heads are turned. One of my students actually stops me. Mind you, I teach preschool at this school. I taught the youngest grade level. So my student tries to stop me and she's like, Miss Kalani, you have to stop. You have to stop for the flag. I just turned to her, already like a little heartbroken that it was already happening with her age range, 3 to 4. And I said, honey, you don't have to stop if you don't want to stop. And so I just kept walking. I ended up getting an email a few hours later from my principal. The following day, we had a meeting. He wanted to speak with me on what he had seen. He came at it in a very professional way. I don't want to speak negatively about this school. I don't want to speak negatively about him. I had a good relationship with him, and he was also Indigenous. So there were we had a lot of commonalities in the topics and things that we would discuss. However, he was also running a school. He started off by letting me know, I don't want to lose you as a teacher. I think I want you to stay, and I hope by me saying this, I'm not losing you. But there's things in place at this school and you have to follow them as long as you work here. I know your political beliefs, but you are a role model for our students and you have to set that example. I ended up going home that night and I cried. For me, it was so symbolic. It was so much more than just stop and face the flag or just stop when you hear this. It wasn't about. For me, it was a reminder that we are still illegally occupied to this day. It was a reminder that I was working for a system that was still assimilating our students and indoctrinating our kids, our Native, our Indigenous, our marginalized communities. But here we are in Hawaii, and here we are enforcing them to pay respects to the very flag that stripped everything away from us, stripped our culture, moved to the right flag, stripped our identity, language, our dance, stopped that from us. There's deep trauma, embedded generational trauma when you suppress a culture. So not only that, but here we are giving respects and honor to this flag that took all of that away. I realized oh my God, it's still happening to this day. And I'm a part of it because here I am working in this system in this institution, and I now need to follow it, and now I need to push that onto my students. So it was really deep and personal for me. Out of respect for my principal, I told him that I would stop for the flag, but my back would be turned and I would not enforce it on the students. And that worked for the time being, but there were a collection of things that just kept adding up, things that I kept seeing. Another one being that they did the Pledge of Allegiance at the school, and that teachers were enforcing their students to do the Pledge of Allegiance, something else that I can't wrap my head around. Here in Hawaii, we are doing the Pledge of Allegiance, honoring a flag and pushing that on our kanaka maoli, on our Native Hawaiian kids. That was our biggest demographic of students at this school. That is our next generation, and we are continuing to assimilate them. I started to see the real issues and how colonialism has played a big part within our education system. I started to see that there were two sets of students. They have a diagnosis and there is something chemically imbalanced, but then I was seeing another set of students and all these other factors contributing to it, like our food source, what kind of food we're giving our kids, how is our food made, and the effects that colonialism has played within our food industry. And then a lot of students, kids coming from broken homes, marginalized communities with drinking and drug abuse. I was seeing all these other factors that really contributed to this label. As a special education teacher and in this field, I started to see how all of it plays a factor and a part. So there were just a pile of things where in education at several different schools on Oahu, they're still teaching the same things. Christopher Columbus, he discovered the Americas and the four founding fathers as if they weren't slave owners. So let's talk about the real people, real education. And that's the education that I hone to give out on this platform, on this podcast. Shortly after becoming a teacher, maybe like within a year, I ended up leaving Oahu and I moved here on Hawaii Island. I've come to realize that you can't escape the system. Even working at a Hawaiian school, I'm seeing the effects that colonialism has played in our education system. But it's not just that. Modern education, it's a global thing. Modern education is rooted in Western ideals and structures. It's the backbone of colonialism, assimilation, and indoctrination. Like that's what modern education is like built off of. I saw it through my travels. I had the amazing opportunity to do the Polynesian Triangle, and across my travels, I tried to travel ethically, so I stayed with people of the culture, but I also worked within that communities. I worked on a vanilla farm, planted native trees, I built beehive homes. There was a lot of cool things that I got to experience during my travels, and during these travels, I was really taken in as family. So we shared meals together, we shared laughs, we also shared cries together. We shared our hurt and our pain. And I really got to see collectively that we're all interconnected, especially Indigenous and Native people and voices and cultures that have been suppressed. We all have so much in common. Conquerors telling our stories that aren't even true. It's one-sided, it's one perspective. Our culture being taken and suppressed, religion and our views, our voice, our home through capitalism, the desecration, having other places build on our sacred places, whether that's a place of our iri kupuna, our ancestral bones, or a sacred place that carries much mana. Those places are destroyed and they're rebuilt on, and it's a common thing that you're seeing across the world. This platform, it's really dedicated to hold a space for all of that. So much of us have lost our lands. It's been a continuation and a fight for our education, for our rights, for our body rights, for our rights as a woman, but our rights on a human level. Everything has been radically changed. This is the year where you really need to be a voice. How are you going to be a voice? And that's what I'm using my platform for. There's so much that needs to be talked about. There's so much that needs to be addressed. The fact that there's only two genders right now, first of all, Indigenous people are two spirit beings. Indigenous people have been here. To give this colonial Western mindset that there's only male and there's only female, there's so much happening collectively right now. There's so much that needs to be discussed and talked about. And I'm excited because I'm going to have people on this platform to share these topics collectively. Education, to share the true history, their creation stories, desecration, the issues that are happening in their home, whether that's here in Hawaii, in my ancestral homeland, or it's across the world through my travels. We'll go back and forth between interview style and then me talking. So I'm really excited. There's so much that I want to get into. But to close it out, that's really what this podcast is about. And I think now more than ever, it's a time where these topics need to be talked about collectively. They need to be discussed and they need to be shared. Let's make a difference all together. Once we can start to open up these spaces and talk about them individually and collectively, we can make real change. Ending with that, please like, follow, share, subscribe. You can find me on all platforms, Native Eyes with a Z, Mana'o. The only platforms where it's different is Instagram and TikTok, where it's native_eyes with a Z _mana, MANA _O, Native Eyes Mana'o. Thanks for tuning in.